There are peculiar instances that arrive without warning, where everything appears motionless on the surface, yet deep within, you sense something unnamed stirring, as though a fresh chapter awaits, even when no obvious signals point the way. You no longer fit into what once felt comfortable and familiar, yet you haven't stepped fully into anything different either. All you recognize is that transformation is underway. Quietly, without fanfare, but inevitably. According to principles found in Jungian psychology, before any leap in awareness occurs, the unconscious mind sends preliminary signals. These aren't loud or dazzling moments. They're simply subtle shifts in how you feel, what you choose, and how you respond to circumstances. And if you're watching this right now, perhaps it's no accident. You might be standing precisely at the threshold where your former self has completed its purpose, and a triumphant version of you is preparing to emerge. In this presentation, we'll explore 7 unmistakable indicators that you're entering a victorious phase of your existence. This isn't about triumphing over anyone else, but rather about overcoming the version of yourself that once held you back. Stay until the finish, because you may realize that the transformation you've been waiting for began long before you became aware of it. Are you prepared to step into your own triumphant chapter? Number 1. When your vitality rejects what no longer serves you. There are instances in existence that seem minor, hushed, almost ordinary, yet they carry profoundly important messages. Like when you're doing something familiar and your heart pauses for a moment. Like when you look at someone you once exhausted yourself trying to keep, but today that desire has vanished. Or when you're sitting at your desk reading familiar lines and your body sighs in a way you can't even explain. These instances appear normal, but in reality, they're signals, indications of a quiet ending and new doors opening. And in the spirit of Carl Jung's teachings, they're reminders that you're beginning to move away from what no longer belongs in your life. This is the first indication of approaching inner triumph. Triumph in Jungian psychology doesn't mean rising above others, nor does it mean life becomes perfect, nor that everything suddenly falls into place. Genuine triumph occurs when your unconscious mind begins rejecting what no longer aligns with your authentic nature. Carl Jung once stated that your vision becomes clear only when you can look into your own heart. The soul always strives to return to wholeness. When something stops harmonizing with your true self, the unconscious sends signals for you to pause. Sometimes through unease, sometimes through exhaustion, sometimes through inexplicable heaviness. I once heard about a woman named Laura who worked in customer service. She was the person everyone relied on. Patient, gentle, dedicated. Each day she smiled, answered every call, and handled every issue with a calmness everyone admired. But for many months, she carried an emptiness inside that she couldn't name. No conflict, no crisis, just a subtle heaviness in her chest whenever she thought about the next day. One morning, on her way to work, Laura stopped at a familiar intersection. The rushing crowd, sunlight falling on the road she'd traveled hundreds of times, and in that moment, she realized her body no longer wanted to turn onto that road. Not because she hated her job, but because a small whisper said, "You don't belong here anymore." She sat there for a long time, hands still gripping the steering wheel, but her heart seemed to be leaving her old life behind. The next day, Laura requested time off. She tried interior design classes simply out of curiosity, and for the first time in months, she felt like she could breathe. A year later, she'd completely changed careers and said she thought she was burnt out. But it turned out her soul was simply rejecting what was no longer right for her. When something stops fitting you, you don't have to force yourself to leave. Your vitality will depart first. That's when energetic rejection appears. Rejection not through words, but through feeling. Imagine wearing a pair of shoes you've had for a very long time. At first, they fit perfectly, comfortably, making you feel confident. But over time, your feet grow, your gait changes, you change. The shoes begin to pinch, become tight, yet you still wear them out of habit. Until one day the pain forces you to stop. You remove the shoes and realize that what hurt you was never the shoes. It was the version of you that no longer exists. Energetic rejection is that moment when you remove the shoes. Many people tell me they feel guilty when they suddenly lose motivation for something they once did. They blame themselves, believing they're weak, inconsistent, undisciplined. But if you look deeper, you'll see. What exhausts you is rarely the difficulty of the task. It's the fact that it no longer fits who you are. You're not tired because you're failing. You're tired because you're being pulled away from a path that no longer belongs to you. That's the essence. You're seeing this because it's finally your turn to triumph. You're not seeing this by accident. You're seeing this because you're standing at the threshold between the old and the new, between who you were and who you're becoming, between the life you forced yourself to lead and the life your soul is guiding you toward. And when your vitality begins rejecting what no longer fits, it means the first triumph is already happening. You're no longer forcing yourself to wear old versions just to be accepted. You're beginning to live as the person growing within you. So if you're feeling tired, burdened, restless, or unable to continue something the way you once did, don't blame yourself. Don't treat this as failure. It's your unconscious, liberating you from what no longer belongs to you, because your life is preparing to carry you into a new, triumphant chapter. Write truth in the comments if you feel this rejection. Number 2. When your rhythm shifts effortlessly, and once you recognize that your inner vitality is rejecting what no longer serves you, a second phenomenon quietly unfolds. Often so subtle you might miss it. Yet it's the deepest evidence that you're entering a new triumphant phase. Your life rhythm begins changing without any effort on your part. Carl Jung called this unconscious restructuring, a process where the unconscious reorganizes your biological rhythms, habits, and way of functioning to prepare for the emergence of a new version of you. Jung once said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This natural shift in rhythm is the unconscious taking the lead. Interestingly, this shift doesn't come from setting goals, making plans, being disciplined, or self-improvement. It doesn't manifest as forcing yourself to wake up earlier, eat healthier, or think more positively. Instead, it happens very naturally, almost unconsciously. One morning you wake up earlier without an alarm. One evening you want to turn off your phone even though you usually scroll late. On a quiet day, you crave a walk instead of sitting. You desire peace instead of loud conversations. You're not forcing yourself to do this. You're not trying to change. You're simply transitioning to a different rhythm. And this is a sign of inner triumph, when the external world remains the same, but you inside are no longer the same person. Perhaps you used to stay awake until dawn scrolling through content, but now you find yourself going to bed earlier without thinking about it. Perhaps you used to fill every silence with noise, but now you seek quiet moments as though your system needs to recalibrate. Perhaps you used to chase constant stimulation, but now you feel drawn to stillness, to sitting alone without guilt or restlessness. These aren't conscious decisions. They're your unconscious mind guiding you toward a new way of being. You're not becoming someone different. You're returning to who you authentically are beneath all the conditioning. This is what Jung meant by individuation, the process of becoming your true self rather than who society, family, or circumstance shaped you to be. There's a story I remember about a man who spent years living loudly, always surrounded by people, always seeking the next event, the next gathering. Then one season he noticed he began declining invitations, not out of resentment or social exhaustion, but because something deeper was calling him inward. He started spending evenings alone, reading, reflecting, sitting in silence. His friends worried he was depressed. But he told them, "This is the first time I've felt truly awake." What appeared to others as withdrawal was actually his soul reclaiming its natural rhythm after years of living according to external expectations. This is what happens when your rhythm shifts without effort. You're not isolating yourself from life, you're deepening your connection to it by first deepening your connection to yourself. The beauty of this phase is that you stop fighting against your nature. You stop trying to maintain rhythms that were never yours to begin with. You stop forcing yourself into patterns that society praised, but your soul rejected. And when this happens, life becomes simpler, not because your circumstances improved, but because you're finally moving in harmony with your inner truth. You wake when your body is ready. You rest when your system needs it. You engage when your heart is present. You withdraw when your spirit requires solitude. There's no performance, no pretending, no exhausting maintenance of an image that was never real. Just you, living as you, guided by an inner compass that's been there all along, waiting for you to listen. If you've noticed your patterns changing lately without you consciously deciding to change them, if you're naturally drawn to different activities, different times, different rhythms than before, understand this isn't randomness. This is your unconscious mind preparing you for the next phase of your evolution. This is evidence that transformation is already underway. Not in dramatic bursts, but in quiet recalibration. You're not losing yourself, you're finding yourself. And that process always begins with returning to your natural rhythm, the one that was there before the world told you how to live. Number 3. When your body speaks and you finally listen. There's a moment in every person's transformation that often goes unnoticed but holds immense significance. It's the moment when you stop treating your body as a tool to be used and start recognizing it as a messenger carrying vital information. For years, perhaps you ignored the tightness in your chest when certain people were around. You dismissed the exhaustion that arrived every time you entered specific spaces. You pushed through the heaviness in your limbs when doing work that no longer resonated. You called this discipline, perseverance, strength. But in truth, it was disconnection. Your body was speaking, and you weren't listening. Then something shifts. You begin noticing the signals. You feel your shoulders tense during conversations that once seemed harmless. You notice your energy drain in environments you thought were neutral. You recognize your breath becoming shallow when considering certain commitments. And instead of ignoring these sensations, instead of pushing through with willpower, you pause. You listen. You honor what your body is telling you. This is a profound sign of inner transformation. Because when you start listening to your body, you're no longer living from your thinking mind alone. You're integrating the wisdom of your entire system. Jung understood this deeply. He spoke of the body as the unconscious made visible. Every sensation, every ache, every moment of tension or ease is your unconscious communicating what your conscious mind might be denying or suppressing. I knew someone who spent years in a relationship that looked perfect on paper. Compatible interests, shared values, mutual respect. Yet every time they were together, she felt a subtle constriction in her throat, a tightness she couldn't explain. She told herself it was anxiety, stress, something she needed to work on. But one day she stopped trying to fix herself and started listening to what that tightness meant. Within weeks she understood. Her body was telling her something her mind wasn't ready to admit. The relationship, though good in many ways, wasn't aligned with her deepest truth. When she honored that message and stepped away, the tightness dissolved. She hadn't been anxious. She'd been receiving a message she kept ignoring. This is what happens when you enter a triumphant phase. You stop overriding your body's wisdom. You stop treating physical sensations as obstacles to overcome. You start recognizing them as guidance, as intelligence, as truth your unconscious is revealing through the only language it knows: sensation. Your body doesn't lie. It doesn't perform. It doesn't pretend. It simply responds to reality as it is. And when you begin listening, you gain access to a level of knowing that transcends logic, analysis, or rational thought. You begin living from intuition, from embodied wisdom, from the part of you that's always been connected to truth. If you've started noticing your body's signals more clearly lately, if you're paying attention to tension, fatigue, ease, or vitality in ways you didn't before, recognize this as evidence of transformation. You're no longer living solely in your head. You're becoming integrated, whole, embodied. And from that place of integration, real triumph becomes possible. Not the triumph of achieving external goals, but the triumph of living in alignment with your deepest self. Your body is your guide. Listen to it. Trust it. Honor it. And let it lead you toward the life that's truly meant for you. Number 4. When you stop fearing the difficult path. There's a particular shift that happens when someone is genuinely transforming, and it's one of the most reliable indicators of inner triumph. You stop avoiding difficulty. Not because you've become masochistic or reckless, but because you've developed a different relationship with challenge. Where you once saw obstacles as threats, you now see them as necessary passages. Where you once sought the easiest route, you now recognize that the most valuable paths often require the most from you. This doesn't mean you seek out suffering for its own sake. It means you no longer run from what's hard simply because it's hard. Jung spoke about this extensively. He believed that growth only happens at the edge of comfort, in the tension between who we are and who we're becoming. He called this place the transcendent function, where opposing forces within us meet and create something new. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding this tension. They choose safety over growth, comfort over truth, ease over evolution. But when you're entering a triumphant phase, something changes. You start walking toward what challenges you, not with aggression or force, but with quiet willingness. You understand that discomfort isn't a sign you're on the wrong path. Often, it's confirmation you're on exactly the right one. I remember reading about a woman who spent years avoiding public speaking, despite knowing it was essential for her work. Every time an opportunity arose, she'd find reasons to decline. Too busy. Not ready. Maybe next time. The avoidance felt like self-preservation. But one day she stopped running. She didn't suddenly become confident. She didn't wait for the fear to disappear. She simply decided that living in fear of something was worse than facing it. She signed up for a speaking engagement while her hands were still shaking. She showed up even though every part of her wanted to flee. And what she discovered was remarkable. The thing she'd been avoiding wasn't nearly as devastating as the story she'd built around it. The fear lost its power the moment she stopped feeding it with avoidance. This is what happens when you stop fearing the difficult path. You realize that avoidance is its own form of suffering, often more painful than the challenge itself. You understand that growth doesn't come from staying where it's comfortable. It comes from stepping into the unknown, into the uncertain, into the places that ask more of you than you think you can give. And when you do this repeatedly, something profound happens. You start trusting yourself. Not because you've proven you'll never fail, but because you've proven you can handle whatever comes. You've proven you won't abandon yourself even when things get hard. There's an old Zen teaching that says the obstacle is the path. Most people interpret this as meaning we should accept obstacles, but there's a deeper layer. The obstacle isn't just something to accept or overcome. It is the path itself. The difficulty you're facing isn't separate from your growth. It's the very mechanism through which growth occurs. When you understand this, you stop resenting challenges. You stop wishing they weren't there. You start recognizing them as invitations, as opportunities, as the exact conditions necessary for your transformation. If you've noticed lately that you're less afraid of difficulty, if you're choosing harder paths when easier ones are available, if you're leaning into discomfort instead of avoiding it, understand what this means. You're not becoming reckless, you're becoming courageous. You're not seeking suffering, you're seeking truth. And truth often requires us to walk through fire to reach it. This is a clear sign that you're no longer living defensively, protecting yourself from life's challenges. You're living offensively, meeting life fully, ready for whatever it asks of you. And that readiness, that willingness, that quiet courage is the foundation of every genuine triumph. Number 5. When your past stops controlling your present. One of the most liberating signs of transformation is when you notice your past no longer holds the same weight. The memories that once haunted you begin to fade. The regrets that consumed your thoughts lose their grip. The resentments you carried for years start dissolving. Not because you've forgotten, not because you've denied or suppressed anything, but because you've integrated what happened and released the need to keep reliving it. Jung called this the process of shadow integration, where we acknowledge the parts of our history we'd rather deny, we feel what we've been avoiding, and then we let it move through us instead of staying trapped inside us. Most people live as prisoners of their past. They make decisions today based on wounds from yesterday. They avoid opportunities because of failures that happened years ago. They reject connection because of betrayals they haven't forgiven. They limit themselves because of beliefs formed in childhood that were never questioned. The past becomes a cage, and they keep living inside it, even though the door has been open the entire time. But when you're entering a triumphant phase, something extraordinary happens. You start recognizing that your past is not your identity. It's simply experience. It happened to you, but it isn't you. You were shaped by it, but you're not defined by it. And most importantly, you have the power to choose how much influence it has over your present moment. There's a powerful story about a monk who was traveling with his student. They came to a river where a woman was struggling to cross. Without hesitation, the monk picked her up and carried her across, then set her down and continued walking. Hours later, the student was still disturbed. "Master," he said, "we've taken vows not to touch women. How could you carry her?" The monk looked at him gently and replied, "I set her down hours ago. Why are you still carrying her?" This is what most people do with their past. They carry it long after it's necessary, long after it serves them, long after the moment has passed. And that carrying exhausts them, weighs them down, prevents them from moving freely into the present. When your past stops controlling your present, you become available to life as it actually is right now. You stop projecting old hurts onto new people. You stop avoiding experiences because they remind you of pain you once felt. You stop defending against threats that no longer exist. You become responsive instead of reactive, present instead of preoccupied, open instead of guarded. This doesn't mean you forget what happened or pretend it didn't matter. It means you've processed it, learned from it, and allowed it to become part of your story without letting it write every chapter going forward. If you've noticed lately that old wounds don't sting the way they used to, if you can think about your past without being consumed by it, if you're making choices based on who you are now rather than who you were then, recognize this as profound evidence of transformation. You're no longer living in the rearview mirror. You're finally here, in this moment. available for whatever wants to unfold. And from that presence, from that freedom from the past, genuine triumph becomes possible. Not the triumph of erasing what happened, but the triumph of no longer being controlled by it. Number 6. When comparison loses its power. There's a very specific shift that signals you're entering a triumphant phase of life, and it's one that often goes unnoticed because it's so internal. You stop measuring yourself against others. Not in a forced way, not through self-discipline or positive affirmations, but naturally, effortlessly, as though a switch has been flipped inside you. Where you once scrolled through others' achievements feeling inadequate, you now observe with genuine neutrality, sometimes even appreciation. Where you once felt threatened by someone else's success, you now recognize that their path has nothing to do with yours. Where you once needed to be better than, faster than, more accomplished than, you now simply need to be yourself. Jung understood this deeply. He spoke about the danger of living through persona, the mask we wear for the world. When we're trapped in persona, we're constantly comparing because we're trying to prove something, to earn approval, to validate our worth through external measures. But when we start living from the self, from our authentic center, comparison becomes irrelevant. We're no longer in competition with anyone because we're no longer trying to be anyone other than who we actually are. This is true liberation. Not freedom from others' judgment, but freedom from the need for their approval in the first place. Imagine standing by a lake. When the water is murky, you see only reflections of others. But when the water becomes clear, you see only the sky and yourself. When the mind is full of comparison, you live in the noise of the world. When the mind settles, you return to your own center, and the world stops dictating your rhythm. The truth is, comparison only has power when you're still living from persona, from the part of you trying to prove something, protect an image, or become worthy of love. But when you live from the self, you no longer seek external approval because you've accepted yourself first. You don't run at someone else's pace because you've heard your own rhythm again. You don't need anyone to slow down for you to feel sufficient. You don't need to run faster to prove anything. You understand that each person is at a different point on the map of their soul's journey, and you can't compare the color of sunrise to the color of sunset. There's a Zen story I deeply appreciate. A student asked the master, "How can I stop comparing myself to others?" The master took him to a garden where peonies, roses, and wildflowers were blooming simultaneously. The master asked, "Do you see any flower trying to be like another?" The student shook his head. The master smiled. "This is the way of the universe. Every flower blooms in its own season. Only humans think they must bloom into something else." The student was silent for a long time, and from that day forward he stopped trying to catch up with anyone. You will do the same. One day you'll realize something profoundly important. When comparison loses its power, you enter a phase where life begins opening in the way that's most beneficial for you. Because your energy is no longer leaking towards someone else's story, it returns to nourish your own path. When you stop comparing, you're no longer moving sideways. You're moving forward into the depth of your own life. If you feel yourself becoming more peaceful in your journey, less focused on others, less subject to the pressure of their success, understand that this isn't indifference. It's a sign that you've returned to your true center. And from that center, your triumph is beginning right now. Number 7. When you start acting without needing motivation. Quiet, consistent action. There's something that sounds paradoxical, yet is more accurate than anything else. You know you've changed not when you feel better, but when you start doing what needs to be done. even on days when you feel absolutely nothing. Jung called this inner alignment, when consciousness and the unconscious move in the same direction. You don't need to psych yourself up. You don't wait for inspiration. You don't search for motivation. You simply act, naturally as breathing, gently as an invisible movement along your spine. No fireworks, no noise, no great explosion, just a quiet stability deep within you that knows exactly what needs to be done. Perhaps you once acted cyclically, working intensely on days without motivation and doing nothing on days of fatigue. But at a very strange moment, you notice you're waking up early without an alarm. You're cleaning your room not because you must, but because you want to clear space for a clear mind. You're exercising not to be disciplined, but because your body is returning to its natural rhythm. This isn't motivation. This is maturity. A woman once shared that for years she couldn't maintain any habit longer than 3 days. But in the phase when she entered deep transformation, she suddenly began journaling every night. Not because of a 30-day challenge, not because she wanted to improve, simply because each night her hand opened the journal, wrote, released her thoughts effortlessly, as though her body knew she needed this. When I asked why, she said, "It's not that I wanted to, it's that I write." The answer was simple, but it revealed the essence of this stage. Action no longer depends on emotion, but on a new identity forming within you. Imagine pushing a boat across land. At first, you must use all your strength just to move it slightly. But when the boat reaches water, just a gentle push is enough and it moves on its own. Your quiet consistency is the moment when your lifeboat touches water. You no longer need brute force. You only need rhythm. And the water does the rest. Neurobiology calls this neuroplastic integration. When a habit is repeated long enough in a state of calm, without stress or pressure, the brain creates new pathways. Actions no longer drain your willpower. They become natural responses. In other words, you don't need motivation because your nervous system has learned this is who you are. And here's what's interesting. You'll notice this change doesn't manifest on days when you feel powerful, but on days when you feel normal, without climax, without excitement, without a breakthrough moment. Yet you still do the work, still take care of your body, still complete what needs to be done. You still take each step, even if no one sees you or applauds you. These seemingly empty days become the foundation for every subsequent triumph. Jung once said, "You are what you do, not what you say you'll do." And that quote comes fully alive in this phase. No more promises, no more grand plans, no more explosive days followed by collapse. Only one thing remains. You act, because this is the person you're becoming. Small actions, repeated quietly and consistently. This is the clearest sign of true inner strength. If your life once relied on inspiration, it now relies on understanding. On understanding that you don't have to win today. You only need to continue one step, then another. And slowly, gradually, you distance yourself from your former self without even noticing it. And on a very gentle day, you'll realize you've accomplished things you once considered impossible to maintain. Not because you became more disciplined, but because you're no longer the person who lived solely on temporary motivation. You've become someone who acts from the level of identity, from a deeper self emerging within you. So if you've noticed lately that you're acting more steadily, doing the right things without emotional impulses, moving gently but consistently, know that this isn't accidental. It's a clear sign that you've entered a chapter where triumph no longer comes from intensity, but from maturity. When you travel through these 7 signs, you'll notice a very subtle truth. The triumph Jung spoke of was never about shining moments that others should applaud. It's quiet evolution, where you begin living from your center instead of reacting to life. You no longer hold on to what is past. You don't follow rhythms that don't belong to you. You're not afraid of the difficult path, nor are you a prisoner of the past. You move as yourself, neither more nor less. And then you understand that true triumph isn't your turn to win something from the world, but your turn to become the person your soul has been waiting for all along. And if you're seeing this exactly when your life is changing, perhaps it's a reminder that the old chapter ended more gently than you realized. Because ultimately, triumph isn't the peak of the mountain. It's the moment you stand straight in your truth and move forward, even when the road ahead isn't fully cleared. Write "I am" in the comments to affirm your new identity.